Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Maddock. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at mikemalatesta.com. Today, I'm fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. Mike Maddock is joining me on the podcast. Mike is a business reinvention and growth expert who gives leaders the confidence to take bold action by providing the inspiration, tools, and connections they need. All of this comes with a well-earned humility of a lifetime entrepreneur. Mike's also a keynote speaker and the author of 4 books, the latest of which is called Plan D, Lessons from the World's Most Successful Disruptors. Mike's purpose is to inspire and empower curiosity. At Maddock Douglas, the firm that he started, he leads a team that collaborates with corporate leaders responsible for answering the question, what's next? Together, they help design, brand, and launch new products, services, and business models. And to ensure sustainable growth, they empower companies by creating agile cultures that will continually innovate. Hey, Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I owe Tim Dodge a thank you from YPO. So Mike, Tim, and I are all in YPO. And even though I told Mike we'd met before, but we really hadn't. We just kind of ran into each other at an event or two. And it's, you know what's weird, Mike? I have to say, like when I ran into you, I never thought to myself, and this is so, it like doesn't mean anything, but I never thought to myself, that guy's probably a writer and a speaker and, all of these things. Cause you're just, some people that do the things you do come across with a persona that, you think, oh, okay, yeah. And I just never, so anyway, I'm glad that you do all of those things because it's going to give us so much to talk about. But I'm super glad that Tim thought of me and you together to do this podcast. So Tim, who was on the show in the early days, so I think this is like number 178 or something, and I think Tim was in the top 10. So he was nice enough to actually get started when I had no idea what I was doing. And still, maybe I don't have any idea what I'm doing. But
I think you're doing pretty well. Tim is one of the better humans in the world. I love that guy. He's a very sweet, clever. His heart is as big as his brain.
Yeah, good. That's a perfect way to put it. So anyway, Mike, I start every show with the same simple question. How did it happen for you?
I was born in a middle class family. In early days, money meant power and freedom. And my parents, if we wanted money, we had to work for it. And so I quickly went out and started getting jobs. I got my first job at 14, my second job at 14, my third job at 15. Along the way, I was, of course, doing the cliche, doing people's lawns and shoveling snow, et cetera. And when I had a couple bucks in my pocket, I could do what I wanted. And luckily, and this is just by luck, everyone that I worked for was an entrepreneur. And I got a chance to see up close that they weren't perfect, that it was really, really messy. And what they all had in common was they believed they could do it and they just kept at it. And so that was a real blessing for me that I got to see behind the curtain as a young man. And I've had some really good bosses and really bad bosses, but all of them were entrepreneurs. So I learned, it gave me the courage to say, hey, maybe I could do this too.
Okay, so let's explore messy. So and I know we're going back a ways for this, but what were some of the things that you observed in these entrepreneurs that you would describe as messy?
Well, so my first job was at 31 Flavors, Mr. and Mrs. Domeyer. I remember they had sold the family house and ranch to pursue the dream of scooping ice cream. They told themselves the story, or been told the story, that, how bad could it be? You're making people smile and you're making money. Well, it's hard to make money scooping ice cream.
Right.
So I got a chance as they were closing, watching literally Mr. Domeyer counting the pennies and the scoops and being consoled by his wife, and they just kept at it. And, they just every day showed up. My second job was at Gordon's Fine Furniture, which was right next door. And Cy Gordon was the owner. And man, that guy had a temper and he was charming. And his daughter, Sandy, came to work for him. She went to Drake University. And I'm schlepping furniture around, watching behind the scenes, the screaming and the yelling and the smiling and the just doing everything they could to sell another piece of furniture. And this is a store that had been around for decades.
Yeah.
And it wasn't easy, but they just kept at it.
So like when the camera's off, sort of thing. Like,
yeah. And here, one more story. I was a laborer for a construction company in Chicago. And it was a high-rise, real, unbelievably premium build. So Eddie Einhorn had a place there. He owned the White Sox. Judge Crown, just really wealthy people were building out floors. And so every floor was different. So the best craftsmen, self-employed craftsmen in the world were in there doing carpentry, custom carpentry, and electricians, etc. And every once in a while, you'd hear this litany of swear words. And you see that this carpenter, who's the best in the city, had just miscut a piece of mahogany. He screwed up. And, I was bright enough to understand that wood costs a lot of money. And even the best in the city would mess up, but they kept going. And so it's just not perfect. And I think people think in order to run a business, you have to be really smart, or you have to be, really, really gifted. I don't think so. I think you have to be a little bit of lucky, and you have to be tenacious.
And what about your parents, Mike? Were you mentioned middle class. I'm assuming your parents maybe weren't entrepreneurs, but I don't want to make that assumption, so I'll ask.
No, they weren't. My father grew up in Seattle, and he got a scholarship to Notre Dame. He was a debater and a ROTC. He met my mom at a mock Republican convention at Notre Dame. My mom kicked his seat and asked him to please kindly shut up because he was being too loud. And somehow that turned into a first date. And my dad went over to Vietnam for 3 years. He would come home just long enough to impregnate my mother and then go back to war. And then he took a job at Keebler and worked at Keebler his whole career. So he was a lifer. And my mother, she worked as a teacher and then became a stay-at-home mom. So they talked about entrepreneurship, but they didn't own their own businesses. So I learned on my own through jobs that I got again, and it was just totally coincidence and luck, I think, that I wound up working for those types of companies.
And you mentioned having money in your pocket and equating that with freedom. How did you use your freedom at that time? The freedom that money provided you.
Yeah, it reminds me. So it's at the end of a summer. I'm going into my junior year in college. And my dad said, well, man, you've been working hard all summer. And I said, yeah. And he goes, so how much money have you saved for college? And I'd made probably about $14,000, which is a lot of money back then, just working my butt off. And I said, I think I've got like $2,200 saved. Oh. My dad looked at me and he's just, the life left his face, and his shoulders sagged. It was a real moment for me. I'll never forget it. And I go, Dad, what's the matter? And he goes, I just feel like I failed you as a father. And I go, what do you mean, Dad? And he goes, I just don't think I've taught you the value of money. And I go, Dad, hey. And at that moment, I realized it was on me, and I said, hey, listen, this is my deal. I got this. I'll take it from here. It's my responsibility. I'll find a way to pay for college. I'll get the loan. I'll go. So the short answer is I spent it and had fun. That's what I did with the money. But it was just part of the adventure. We could do a whole other show about people's relationships with money. I think it's fascinating. For me, it's always been kind of a fuel for fun and memories, make memories with money.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to spend it to get the lessons that come along with having it. You just
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one of the lessons was that I could make it. I've always had a lot of confidence. There's a there's an old Dunkin' Donuts commercial. Gotta make the donuts.
yeah,
Gotta
right.
make the
The old
donuts.
guy at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Right. Yeah.
trying to make the
Like,
donuts. Yeah.
don't worry. And the Doritos, don't worry, we'll make more. For me, it was like, well, I know how to make it. And so I'll figure it out. And I learned that from watching entrepreneurs. You just grind it out and you constantly pivot. So I think one of the big ahas for me is a question that kids should be asking themselves really early in life is, are you a finisher or are you a starter? Turns out I'm a really good starter and a really, really bad finisher. And I think most business people fall into one of those two categories. And there's a paradox of entrepreneurship that, what makes you great at starting makes you really bad at finishing. Or said differently, what, as Marshall Goldsmith says, what got you here won't get you there. So people that are great at starting businesses typically aren't really good at scaling them, in my experience.
And when you say you're, you're either a finisher or a starter, you're not just talking about entrepreneurs there, or are you? Because I'm trying to figure out if an entrepreneur is not a good starter, how do they become a good finisher?
Well, so I just in business in general is what I'm talking
Okay.
about. I wrote a book called Free the Idea Monkey to focus on what matters most. And it was really about the tension between finishers and starters, or visionaries and operators, Walt Disney and Roy Disney. And in every company that I've seen that is really great at um, adapting to changing markets and scaling, they have a couple things in common. One is that they're in a business that's growing. They pick the right wave, using a surfing metaphor. And the other thing is that they have a balanced executive team. That the team has a shared dose of visionaries and a really healthy dose of people that are operators, finishers, and starters. But most entrepreneurial companies start with a visionary, someone with an idea. And unless they get around to getting the company in balance, they tend to stall you know, and peak out pretty quickly, which is my story, uh, 6 times over now. I've started 6 multi-million-dollar businesses. Yay me.
Mm-hmm.
But what they all have in common is they got to a point and they just kind of flattened out. So I think a lot about that.
And when does that, in your experience with those six businesses, for example, when does the starter fire, extinguish? Like, is there a moment that you've sort of figured out over your experiences where you're like, oh, okay, that's the trigger for me. That's the trigger. I got to do something different, or we'll take some different action, bring in somebody to run it, whatever choices you've made.
Yeah, it's a good question. So um, I Vern Harnish is a friend. He started Entrepreneurs Organization, and I remember being at a conference with him out at MIT maybe 20 years ago, and he got in front of the board. It was one of those, Psych 101 rooms where a couple hundred people in a room, and he drew a line across this board, and he put 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, all the way up to 200 employees. And he said, at 2 employees, this is the issue. At 4 employees, this is the issue. At 6 employees, this is the issue. And went walking all the way down up to 200 employees. And he dropped the dry erase marker and said, does anybody have any questions? It was this really amazing moment. So you have about 100 people in the room. They're all entrepreneurs from around the world. And someone in the back row from California, she's like, oh my gosh, it's like you're a psychic. I remember going, well, that's a weird thing to say. But the point was that there are these things that happen as companies scale that are predictable, and they go with the size of the company. And so in my experience, at about 20, 25 employees, the hero can no longer run the company. Systems have to take over. And systems are what finishers know how to do. And so all of a sudden, you have scalable systems, you have management, you have KPIs, et cetera, that all come out of the brain of operators or finishers. And that's what allows a company to get from, 3 to 5 to 10 million to 15 million to 25 million in revenue. There are differences in every industry, of course, but there's a lot more sameness than differences, I've found.
That that was a very easy explanation. Thank you for that. And it's probably still, what do you think? Probably still one of the, you seem to have had the epiphany, but a lot of others, they just get to that point, they don't have that epiphany, and they keep trying to jam what worked for them up to that point. And just like, it'll get better eventually, I don't have to do anything. They're just confused and locked and stuck. And has that been your experience with people you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, because in order to have the Tom Kane, one of my first mentors, when I just, so I've got this little business going. I'm probably 20, 26 years old, and Tom's this salty old sailor, and he's an old designer. He's had a company for 30, 40 years, done well. And he goes, Michael, you know how I know you're going to be successful? And I go, how's that, Tommy? He goes, because you're too goddamn stupid to know that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And that's it, right? You have to be kind of an idiot.
Yeah.
You have to be sort of a narcissist. You have to believe that that you can actually make a dent in this industry that is being run by these multinationals. That's the courage and the naivete that it takes. But that's the same thing that becomes your big blind spot when it's time to go, hey, maybe I need a little help here. And so I think that, there's a reason why the most successful businesses are started by people in their 50s. One of the reasons is humility. They've been around the block enough times to go, hold on a second, intelligence is painful and it leaves bruises and dents. Wisdom is much easier. I need to go find someone that has done this before who can make it, less painful. And I think that's what happens. But so there's this balance that happens in really good executive teams. And most of us don't have it because we surround ourselves with people that are reflections of our own goodness, whether we understand it or not.
And you mentioned Marshall Goldsmith a bit ago. For people who don't know who he is, Mike, who is Marshall Goldsmith?
Marshall Goldsmith is a friend. He has been called the #1 executive coach in the world. He is somewhat of a maverick in the coaching world. He was the person that was a pioneer in 360 evaluation. He also pioneered the idea of, hey, it costs $1 million to hire me as a coach. And if I don't do what I'm going to say I'm going to do with you, then I'm free. So, Bill Ford hired him and some other people. He's written a whole bunch of books. He's a wise sage in the coaching industry.
And I like his, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I only became aware of him last year, I think, or I'd forgotten if I had been aware of him before, but I'm on his newsletter, his email thing now. And he just the other day was reiterating, what's the value you bring to work every day? And he was talking about him, not charging. It's like, if I don't have a demonstrably positive impact on your business in 18 months or whatever, I'm not going to charge you for being a coach, right? And when you look at a lot of the coaching industry now, and coaching industry is huge, and there's some that are long established like he and Dan Sullivan and some others, and then there's a lot of people who became coaches, in the last couple of years, and it's just their approach seems like very different. It's like, buy this from me and you'll be, an overnight success or something. And his approach, I really do like his approach. He's very humble and easy to listen to, and he makes sense. He's not, there's no Ferrari in the back of the picture with Marshall. It's like,
Yeah, I met Marshall. I've run an entrepreneurial group out at MIT for we've been getting together now for 17 years. And I asked Marshall to come out and present to us twice now. And he's been very generous with his time and come out and mentored a bunch of us. He started a group called 100 Coaches. It was a referral only group. And what he said was, I'm going to give away of everything I've learned to 100 coaches. And then your job is to give that away as well. It's a way for him to have a legacy. And so I was fortunate to become part of that a couple of years ago. And he's one of those people that he's easy to learn from, because it's clear that he's quite humble and plain spoken, which is something that I respond to.
So what is that 100 coaches? What do you actually do, Mike? What do you do?
We get together and share. We learn from Marshall, learn from each other, and help each other out. It's a peer group for coaches. And I fell backwards into coaching. It's something that I do because people ask me. Well, first of all, I woke up one day and noticed that a lot of the people that I was talking to were actually coaches. They were calling me and saying, "What do you think about this?" And then people started to ask me if I would coach them. And for years I'd get off stage after speaking and say, "Hey, do you coach people?" And I said, "Well, I'll help you if I can. Why should I get paid for this? What do you need?" And then a few years back, someone said, "I need to hire you for something." So I thought I needed to learn more very quickly about coaching. So I went looking for, groups like Marshall's, et cetera. Okay. So anyway, one of the things that taking this idea a little bit further, you have visionary and operator, or ringleader and idea monkey. A few years ago, I started to think about Forum. And Mike, I imagine you've been in Forum.
I am in YPO Forum, yes.
How long have you been in your Forum?
10 years, maybe 11.
What's your, not to put you on the spot, but tell me what you think. Like, what's the greatest thing about Forum for you?
So YPO is a big organization. There are some people who get very networked into the organization because that's just who they are. And I struggle with that. So for me, Forum is like my own little club inside of YPO where I don't feel nervous, or I don't feel anxious or intimidated by anybody. And I feel, it's a safe place where I can not only share what's happening with me, but also can contribute to one of the other members whatever they're sharing, and ultimately the goal is to help each other be more successful in life. So that's how I look at it. How do you look at it?
So, just first context, a forum, there are all kinds of groups that are forum led. So you mentioned Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, YPO, Young Presidents Organization, EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, Vistage. And I've been involved with most of those organizations. And the number one member benefit is Forum. A forum is a group of peers that get together usually once a month for 4 hours or so. And everything that's said in the room stays in the room. And it's a way to bring your toughest challenges to a group where in a safe place you can solve them. And the longer you've been in Forum, and the more it goes into, personal and business gets blended together. So you're talking about everything from, making payroll to, problems with your children, et cetera. Right. And I've been in a YPO Forum for about 15 years, and EO Forum for 22 years now. And it's the second best decision I've ever made in my life. I mean, best friends I have. Together, we've been through, every high and low that you can imagine in life. But my experience has been that even forums are out of balance. It's almost like you take a whole bunch of ingredients and throw them in a pot of water and expect the soup to taste good. And usually it doesn't. And when forums are allowed to recruit people on their own, they tend to become more out of balance. And this is the conversation we were having earlier, where so now you have a group of people that are sort of that might think like you. I remember the first forum meeting I ever had. I went around the room and in my mind, I'm going, yes, yes, no, absolutely not,
Oh,
absolutely not. And I was evaluating who is going to give me value. And, turns out I was exactly wrong
sure.
because the people that think differently than you are the ones that show you your blind spots. But I was attracted to the people that were like sales minded you know, and so um, I have seen, so I did some research and it turns out that on executive teams that are really balanced, there's not just the visionary and the operator, there's also a strategist and a rainmaker and a tech futurist and an orchestrator. And I set up a company called Flourish Forums, plural, that is basically a curated advisory board where I go out, it's like playing Tetris. I go out and find people who are running companies that are naturally operators, naturally strategists, naturally rainmakers, and put them in a room together. And then you have the forum experience, but you also have a balanced outcome. In other words, the feedback you get is tempered by 6 different types of thinking.
Hmm. And how do you, so that's really interesting. How do you, well, I assume that that's not just a local thing then. So that's, you can go broad.
It's
How do
virtual.
you,
Yeah.
how do you find, like, how do you, what's the matrix that you run through, Mike, or whatever, to get the right people? And then how do, it's interesting. Like it seems like, you said Tetris. I thought of that. It's just lunch or something, that dating thing where they sort of, figure out that who might be a good fit, and then you go to lunch and see. How do
Yeah.
you?
So it's a referral only. So, you and I have both been involved with YPO and EO, et cetera. So I ask people, I'm looking for people that are great operators historically. For example, so in the room, if there are 12 members, there are only 2 seats, 2 operators, 2 strategists, 2 rainmakers, 2 visionaries, et cetera.
Hmm.
So there's a scarcity. So I'm looking for 2 things. One, a company, someone that is a visionary, for example, that is in charge of the future for a company in this band of revenue, because I want to keep people in the same revenue bands. And I go looking for referrals from people that I trust. And I interview the people, then I have them take the Colby test. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I've taken Colby
Do you remember
once.
your result?
Yeah. So at first time I took it, I was a 7644,
Yeah.
and then I took it like a decade later, and I always have to look it up what I am. So you can keep talking about it, but it's different. Like my quick start went up to 8,
Wow.
and I think my implementer actually shrunk from 4 to like 2.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's interesting because Colby tends to be pretty reliable. It doesn't change much throughout
right.
life. So that's unusual. What I love about Colby, and I like you, I bet I'm sort of a junkie in all these tests, DISC and Strengths Finder and Myers-Briggs, all these tests we've used to help our clients over time. Um, but what Colby measures is what you do under pressure and what you do in flow, and it's the same thing. It's reliable. And so if you think about your advisory board or executive board, you want someone that is going to be reliably reactive the same way, whether the shit is hitting the fan or things are going really well. You need them to be consistent. And so the goal is, and here's the challenge, Mike. After you've been in business for a while, you know how to operate a company, you know how to make rain, you know how to, you have a vision. So you can do all these things. But what do you do best? It's like
Right.
putting together a basketball team. Are you a better point guard or a forward? Because we want you in that position where you're going to, when things are going really well or under pressure, you're going to do the best at your job. So it's more about focusing on your strengths and your weaknesses and putting you in the seat where you're going to feel most comfortable. And Colby helps me when someone says, well, I'm kind of good at everything. I can say I'm sure you are, but based on your Colby score, you're a strategist, and I have a seat for a strategist or I don't. Um, so now, you know, taking a step back, the best definition for a creativity that I've ever heard is the ability to have lots of ideas about a particular topic and then choose the right idea at the right time. So the ability to be divergent and converge on the right idea at the right time. And what I've found is that in a Flourish forum, you get the divergence because you have lots of different ideas because people see the problem differently. And then when you're ready to pick, if it's your challenge that the group is talking about, when you're ready to pick a strategy, you feel more confident because it's been tempered by these 6 different levels of thinking. So you then can converge more confidently.
Okay, that's interesting that you use Colby for that. That's a good. It seems like the maybe the simplest of. I don't know if the simplest is the right word, but of all the tests that you mentioned, it is. I've been taught at least it's pretty clear cut. You know, it's like fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer, right? So just kind of measures those 4 things, and where you are is where you are. Um, Makes it easy. Yeah, makes it easy. You don't. Yeah. Okay. All right. I like that.
And your Colby score, I will tell you, if it is 7682, is incredibly rare.
No, oh no, it was 7644 the first time I took it in 2003,
Yeah,
and then I took it in 2018, I think, and it was 5582.
5582. Oh yeah, you became more of a quick start. Well, what I was responding to was that you were, I'll call it above the line in your fact finder, follow through, quick start, which makes you, you can meet people where they are. I call
Right.
that an orchestrator score, where you're really good at understanding and hearing out a crazy quick start, or you can roll with a fact finder and dig deep, or you're willing to be pragmatic with a follow. So those, your type of score tends to be, um, like the head of HR at a large company tends to have a score like that because
Wow.
they have to be able to relate to everyone and meet them where they are. And pivot thinker is another way of thinking. It's 2% of all the people in the world have a score like that. So it's pretty cool.
Hmm. And Mike, let's go back to that conversation you had with your dad about savings for college, and you're ready to go to college. You got $2,200, and you say, okay, I got this. I'm going to take care of it. So you worked hard through from 14 up through high school, so 18 or whatever. You go to college. What were you thinking when you got there in terms of what your career was going to be? And maybe you didn't know when you got there, but I don't know. What was going on?
Well, so I was a cartoonist in high school. I was a
Oh,
cartoonist in college. I had a job, um, full time as an illustrator cartoonist at a t-shirt shop, with a guy called T Galaxy in Ames, Iowa. Go Cyclones. It was owned by Doug Harms, an amazing entrepreneur who I learned a lot from. And so I was going to go into creative services. I started my own little creative services boutique my junior year in college. I was selling greeting cards. So I was already doing a lot of things, just playing. There's a great book called The Second Mountain by David Brooks.
hmm.
Um, and it talks about how in life you have at least 2 mountains, and the second mountain is caused by great success or by tragedy, where you wake up and you stop moving from like just doing to being purpose led. And my big takeaway from the David Brooks book was that we do our kids a disservice by saying follow your passion, because what happens is these kids are like, I don't know what my passion is. And they get stuck. They're like, there are so many opportunities that they're like, geez, I don't think I know what I was born to do yet, so I'm just stuck. So you have these, you know we have these parents who've done, because there's truth to it, right? If you find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Sure.
Well, here's his big takeaway is the only way you find something you love is to start doing a whole bunch of stuff you hate. Like, you just got to get
Yeah,
out
it's
there and
experimentation.
that's right.
Right.
Like, so failing forward, first attempt at anyway. So I was already doing that, and I just knew that I would find a way to pay off the college loan. When I graduated from college, I took the first job I could get. Um, it was with Tom Kane. I was selling something under the condition that I could show my portfolio. I was selling some kind of comping system for printing, and one of my appointments was with a company out in Carroll Stream, Illinois. I sold them the system, and then I said, "By the way, are you hiring?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, we're looking for an art director." I go, "Well, I got my portfolio in my car." And he goes, "Well, let's see it." They hired me. I went back to Tom and said, "Well, I sold that system for you, and I got a job." He goes, "Good for you, Michael." Um, and that was where I met my first real business partner, Wes Douglas, out of college, and I met my wife Ruthie there. So it was the best job ever, you know.
Really? Oh,
And I only worked there for about a year and a half before I started, um, you know, my a company in 1991. And really, it was I didn't like working there, but I really liked Ruthie. I was trying to get her to date me. She'd been dating the same guy for 5 years, so it was a really difficult challenge. Um, and then I interviewed for a job to be the editorial cartoonist for Pioneer Press, which was a newspaper company that owned a bunch of different publications in the Midwest. They gave me the job. I went in to resign, and they doubled my salary to stay, which kind of pissed me off because, like, what? So I should have been making twice as much. But Ruth had not agreed to go on a date with me yet. So I reneged on the editorial cartoonist job, stayed with, which was probably not a good thing to do, but I really was focused on Ruth at the time, and stayed with that job for another 6 months until Ruthie and I were dating. And then I started up Maddock Douglas.
Was it the extra cash in your pocket that got Ruthie's attention, Mike, or what was?
No,
Well,
no. Ruthie, thank God she's never, she's the daughter of a mechanic, Dick McCausland, uh, and she actually was put off. She tells me today by, because I told her when we started dating that I was going to be very successful and make a lot of money. She didn't like hearing that. She didn't think it was a very inspirational purpose. It
oh,
isn't.
really?
No, which is endearing, right? And actually, it gave me a lot of courage because she didn't. I never had someone at home going, "Why aren't you making more money?" That was never a driver. So it allowed me to take some pretty big risks without worrying about upsetting her.
And so, which yeah, it's interesting. If you went to work for Pioneer, maybe you wouldn't have. Yeah, interesting. Your whole life could have been very different. Um,
Yeah, here's another story. My father was trying to help me find my path. And so when I was a senior in college, he got his boss's boss got me an interview at Leo Burnett, which is a big advertising agency in Chicago.
yeah.
And I remember going, no preparation, grabbed all my crap, went up this elevator at the Prudential building all the way to the top floor, get off the elevator, go up to this desk. And I said, "Hey, I'm here to see Huntley Baldwin." And the woman said, "Okay, he'll be right with you." And I peer over her back, and there's this big corner office overlooking Lake Michigan. And I said, "Can you tell me what Mr. Baldwin does here?" And she looked at me. She's like, "He's the executive creative director worldwide for Leo Burnett." I'm like, "Oh, of course, like, oh, but." So I go in, and this guy who invented Tony the Tiger and the Pillsbury Doughboy and Ernie Keebler, he's a cartoonist, it turns out. And he's the sweetest guy.
Ah,
And he said, "Yeah, Mike, you could work here, but I see you're a cartoonist. Do you like to write or draw cartoons more?" I kind of like doing both. I like selling stuff. He goes, "Yeah, that's a problem because you need to pick a swim lane here." He goes, "You ever thought about starting your own company?"
really?
Because if you come to Leo Burnett, you'll have to do just one of those. That's how you rise here. And so he planted that seed. So when I say luck, it takes a little bit of luck. I think God puts people in your path. And if you're listening, the messages get pretty loud and pretty clear over time.
That's pretty cool that your dad got you high enough up in Keebler to meet the guy who created the character for Keebler.
Yeah, and the coolest thing was his humility. You know, he
Yeah.
didn't he when he saw that I was pretty unprepared. I mean, I was a college kid and just slapped a bunch of stuff together. He was not put off by it at all. He was just like, "Well, how can I help you?" Really sweet guy. And when people call me and say, "Hey, can you talk to my kid?" The answer is always yes. Why not? I I'd love to talk to you. It's an honor. First of all, if someone asks you to help their child, there's no bigger honor. So yeah, my dad did a good one there.
So, Mike, you've started these 6 different companies, which is hard. It's hard enough, even if you know whether you're a starter or a finisher. I mean, that's very, very difficult. But then, and we talked about this when we had our sort of pre-call. You're also what I would consider now to be a prolific writer and speaker. And it's not like you carved, at least the way I'm looking at it, it's not like you carved off everything else in your life to pursue this new sort of thing. I mean, you're still the entrepreneur, right? And I was just amazed by that because I think I shared with you my sort of desire to write a book, and I've been working on it, and here you got at least 4 books, and your newest one is out or coming out soon. I don't know.
Yeah, the
Plan.
newest one is called Plan D. It's about
Right.
disruptors.
So I want to, so I have to know, I have to dig into how you actually managed to do that, Mike, and why. And let's take the writing first, or which came first, the speaking or the writing?
Speaking came first, writing came second.
Okay, and the speaking, did it come first, like doing, business organization type events, that kind of thing, or and then what got you started?
Well, so I went to parochial schools as a kid because my parents were sure that the nuns could fix me. Turns out they were wrong.
Yeah,
But and I would
follow a
get
similar path.
yeah, I would get detentions for doodling and I just couldn't shut up. I mean, I was talking and doodling in class. So the irony of being paid to draw and talk now is not lost on me. Um, so it goes to like, what do you do naturally well? And people um, started to ask if I'd be interested in speaking, in front of groups, and it turns out, you know, once a chatterbox, always a chatterbox. So speaking came naturally to me, and I was encouraged by some of the people that were mentoring me to get up and, if I own consulting firms and creative services firms, so this is a great new business way to, do it because people will come to you with opportunity. So it made sense to me. Um, and then writing the same thing, Vern Harnish, I mentioned him earlier, told me that the best business card in the world is a book. If you have a book, people will see you, they will listen to you, they will believe you. Plus, turns out that it's a really good way to think through ideas is writing. So I started writing for Business Week, and then I started writing for Forbes, and and books really are all they are is a bunch of thoughts strung together. So writing articles can become a straw man for a book. Or said differently, if you have an idea, you can start writing articles about that idea, and
Mm.
then you wake up one day and it's like, wow, there might be a book here, because they can be toggled together in a way that um, is useful for other people.
And how do you get an opportunity to write for Business Week or I don't even know if that's I don't know which magazines are
Yeah, me
still
neither.
around
They're
or
all
not, but
digital now.
yeah.
Uh, you know, I have a friend named Paul Brown, who's an incredible writer. If anybody's looking for someone to help them edit or write a book, I would highly recommend Paul Brown. He has written for the New York Times for years. He's ghostwritten some pretty famous books that you've heard of. I won't give away his secrets, but and he's a great editor. And the reason I know he's a great editor is because the best art directors, the best editors, the best creative directors, they just tell you what needs to be fixed. They don't rework things that are good. I was like, yeah, this doesn't make sense to me. I need an example here. So a friend of mine introduced me to Paul. We became friends. He started to coach me on how to do this. And then he said, hey, if you want, I used to write for Fast Company, Business Week, Inc. magazine, etc. If you want to write for one of these, I'll make some introductions. And he introduced me to someone at Business Week and then Forbes eventually. So I'm indebted to Paul. We've become quite good friends. And he's crazy, crazy talented. Paul B. Brown is his name. He's worth a Google if you want to write a book.
Okay. Well, I wrote that down because I have so many ideas to write more books, but then I think to myself, look how long it took me to do this one. And it's like I'm running out of time, you know?
Yeah, it's like eating a side of beef. When you think about eating a side of beef, it's absolutely overwhelming.
Yeah.
But it's one bite at a time. So I think a good practice is to get up in the morning and write a couple paragraphs about something you're interested in, and then put it in a file, and then eventually you wake up, you have a book. It's Does that make so? I can't
Yeah.
imagine sitting down and writing a novel. That to me is like, I can't eat a side of beef in one. I just can't even do it. But a book on a topic, you've got. I believe in you, Mike.
Hmm. Well, you got to do more than that. You got to sort of walk me through it. So let's talk about. I want to talk about each of your books, but let's start with the newest one, Plan D. So the subtitle is Lessons from the World's Most Successful Disruptors, which is a very popular word these days, right?
Yeah, I define disruptors as people that blow shit up for the good of the whole.
Okay.
So, and the reason I was interested in disruptors is because wherever there is innovation, there's someone that hated something so much that they just couldn't stand for it. And I started Maddock Douglas in 1991, so 30 years ago. And Maddock Douglas is an innovation consulting firm. So we get hired to sit in a room and come up with a new product, a new service, a new business model. And the people that hire us are disruptors. They're the ones in the company typically that the company deemed worthy of blowing things up for the good of the whole. And so I get to watch them. And the book is really just observations about the superhero powers that they had in common. And so I told a story about a disruptor, outlined the superhero power, and then laid out some practices so you could use that superhero power or lean into it if you wanted to.
Hmm. And do you think is it I guess can anyone be a disruptor, Mike? Is it sort of like the starter finisher type thing? You gotta.
Yeah, I don't think, no, everyone can't be a disruptor, but um, because so it's a really good question. Um, I retract. I think that you can be a disruptor, but it takes a certain amount of courage and callousness, because disruptors leave wakes. They tick people off. Change is hard. It makes people, it creates fear and bad feelings and drama when you change things. And so to say I'm going to help change things, you have to be okay with that. And
Yeah.
people are going to lose their jobs. They're going to feel incompetent. They're going to, and so that type of if you start dwelling on that, and some people are naturally built by God to dwell on that kind of thing, you're going to stop yourself and go, no, 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 it's just too hard. So there are certain people that are much better at it. I wrote an article for Forbes years ago about the two faces of disruption. It was the maverick and the orchestrator. Um, Mavericks are fired within 3 years. They could care less. They're brought in. They're kind of like the hired gun in old Western town. They're just going to change things, and they leave a tremendous wake, but they always get hired again in another company. And the orchestrator is typically a woman, typically has been with a company for a couple decades. Everyone loves and trusts this person, and they know where the bodies are buried. So they're much more pragmatic about bringing people along. Um,
those are the two types of people that make really good disruptors in organizations, from my experience.
I think too, it's got to be tough to be an effective disruptor, because when you're blowing up an idea, it's someone's idea that's probably sitting at the table. Like someone came up with that and thought it was a good idea, for example, which is why we're doing it. And when you come in and say, that's that's no longer a good idea, people automatically, right? It's like ownership. Well, what do you mean it's not a good idea? You have to be really, I feel like, to be good, you can't just be like the person who's willing to point out what's wrong. You have to figure out how to make people feel good about the change in what was wrong too.
Yeah, people support what they create. That's an axiom of innovation. So leading with ideas is a really bad strategy, because they're too easy to know that won't work. We've already thought of that. That's illegal, etc. So when you think about the faces of growth, and I lay them out as the operator, the strategist, the rainmaker, the visionary, the tech futurist, the orchestrator, they all have different triggers. And there are different techniques for each one of those that they can take part in to get on board with an idea. The challenge, one of the biggest challenges is there's an expertise trap. um, you know my favorite saying is, you can't read the label when you're sitting inside the jar. You know what works, you know what's illegal, you know why Harry got fired, you know what you can afford, you know what you've tried in the past, you know. And so you're such an expert that you can't see possibility when it's walking right in front of you. And that's why most disruption comes from outside the industry, because people are too naive, or they're so frustrated that they're going to change it. And meanwhile, the experts are saying, no, you can't do that. And in every industry, there's a good meaning expert who's around that table going, no, here's why it won't work. And they have a lot of leverage. They might be a lawyer, they might be a chemical engineer, they might be whatever they are. They know a technologist. They know something that other people don't know, and they're
Right.
afraid of it. And so they keep innovation from happening. So
They,
yeah.
yeah, they may also have an experience from the past that they're imagining is the same as whatever you're talking about would lead to the same thing, and they're like, nope, didn't work, and here's what happened back whenever, right? It's
Yeah, and when I'm on stage, I love telling stories about these experiences, and we've all heard them. I've seen them up close. I mean, I've never told this story about how the chief technology officer yelled at me from Kodak many, many, many years ago. I just asked him, "What about Fuji?" Because I saw that my wife was buying Fuji film at Kmart or something. It was cheaper, it was flimsier, it was shinier and brighter. And he looked at me like, "You don't even understand our business. That's crap. The chemical's bad, the paper's bad." Kodak has captured the history of the world because we know more about chemistry and paper and the quality of photos than anyone else. I'm like, okay, well, guess what? Jeffrey Hazlitt, who became the CMO of Kodak, told me, yeah, Fuji ate our lunch. We couldn't see it coming. The thing was that everything that the CTO of Kodak said was correct, but he didn't know the business they were really in. He thought they were in the paper and chemistry business. Why? Because they had chemical companies and trucks and
right.
like billions of dollars worth of stuff in that business. Meanwhile, they're in the memory business. We've all, I think most of us know that Kodak actually invented digital.
Right.
They had that patent, and there was someone at Kodak screaming from the mountaintop saying, "This is the future. This is the future," in the room. But he couldn't convince the executives that he was right. And, we kind of know the end of the story there.
Right. That's a great point. Like when you've spent your whole life like your dad at Keebler doing whatever he was doing, he was an expert on what he was doing. And if someone came in and said, hey, there's a whole new way to whatever, I don't know what his job was, but there's a whole new way to do this. They're doing it over at, Nabisco. You'd be like, oh, those guys, they're like a fly by night, right? We're Keebler, it's really easy to fall into that trap.
For sure. And we all do it. And just to be
Yeah.
clear, I've done it. I've totally missed. Earlier, I used the surfing metaphor. I think business is a lot like surfing. You can be a really bad businessman, but if you pick the right wave, you will look good and make it to shore. You can be the best businessman in the world. If you pick or best surfer in the world, if you pick the wrong wave, you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
And so the ability to pick that wave is so critical. And when you're an expert, you often miss the wave, the next wave, and the next wave. And that's why, having a balanced perspective is so important and so hard to do.
I like that metaphor of the wave, because if you do catch the right wave, you look like you're everything you touch turns to gold until you try to ride that next wave. Like doing it on something else next is really, really hard. That's where you get humbled.
Yeah, and I'll just share by our own experience. We went in revenue as a consulting firm, we went from 3 to 15 million in revenue inside like 3 years. So we were on the right wave. And at the time we were competing with companies like IDEO and Fahrenheit and Innosight, Clay Christensen's company, and, doing pretty well. And we did not recognize, and it wasn't because we weren't told by really smart people, that the next wave was all about technology. And so in a day, our competition went from being IDEO to McKinsey and BCG and Accenture.
Okay.
And digital innovation became the Trojan horse for, let us sell you 3 or 5 years worth of technology implementation. And I'm so smart that I was telling people, no, because that's a hammer looking for a nail. If you're looking to innovate, it doesn't have to be digital. You have to keep your eyes wide open. Well, that expertise was a problem, because the next wave, everything's going to be a software business. And so you need to be on that wave one way or another. So, it happens in every business.
How long did it take for that to hit you?
Pretty quick. I mean, a couple of years, it was like,
Okay.
Whoa, what happened? So, onward, but my point is that we all have this challenge of missing things because of our own expertise.
Right.
And in my experience, the most clever leaders, clearly I'm not one of them, have found ways to surround themselves with a balanced executive team and infuse outside thinking regularly in a way that helps them respond to the ever-changing and more quickly changing market. The average Fortune 500 company is extinct in 15 years now. Extinct. There's a study by Yale that showed that in 7 years, 75% of the Fortune 500 will be companies we haven't even heard of yet. That's how quickly change is happening. So it becomes very important to surround yourself with balance and perspective and have the systems in place to rethink things quarterly, not yearly.
And is most of that extinction due to mergers or failures, Mike? Just want to be clear on that.
Well, I don't know the answer.
I wonder.
Yeah, it's a good question, but I know that trend is accelerating. I mean, there are all these fun charts and graphs that look like a plane going down, and we know that it's easier than ever with technology to jump in the game. I mean, think of what's the power you have in your phone. That's moonshot power, and everybody has it. So you have that technology. So, your next competitor might be a 16-year-old in West Africa, has an idea that you can't see because you're inside the jar, and that could happen today. Pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's cool if you're in that game. It's scary if you don't want to be in that game and you want to just hold on, right? Because this is working. It's going to continue working, hopefully, at least until I get out of this place. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Show me
Show me a middle-aged white guy who's 3 years away from retirement who says that we're going to innovate, and I will show you a liar. because, because all that person wants to do is get to the finish line without screwing things up.
Right.
I was on the board of the innovation board for General Electric, and I remember going to 30 Rock and going to the top floor and walking down this long hallway full of black and white pictures of middle-aged white guys that had run this company. And some of the guys on the board with me said, "Hey, you know why we're here, right?" And I go, "Yeah, I think we're here to innovate." And he goes, "Yeah, we're here because it's been 13 years since General Electric has launched a new product, service, or business model based on one of its thousands of patents, 13 years. But man, could they Six Sigma, man, could they mitigate risk. Jack Welch had done such a good job that they forgot how to have the next idea. This is Thomas Edison's company.
Right.
Think about that. This is a classic example of a visionary that got a company going, and then it was taken over by operators, and now look at them. So no, is that organism ready? Does it have the right type of muscle to respond to rapid change? Probably not, because they're out of balance.
Were you able to make an impact?
Sort of. But when Welsh left, they lost $200 billion of market share.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I just heard Jeff Immelt on a couple of different podcasts talking about his experience with his new book that comes out, and yeah, it got real ugly real fast.
Jeff was the one, actually Beth Comstock, who.
Oh yeah, okay.
Beth hired us, and so she reported directly to Jeff. And it's an amazing company, great company, people doing the right things, but there's this tension between I've got quarterly numbers to make, and you want me to do what? It's really hard. It's really hard to start something new inside of a machine that is so good at doing what it did yesterday a little bit better today.
So, Mike, when I was reading about your company, you say, I lead a team that collaborates with corporate leaders responsible for answering the question, what's next? So I thought I'd ask you, what's next?
Oh, the futurist question. What's next? I think that that data is going to become much more available to us. In other words, we will be able to summon the right data at the right time. So instruments around us, be our eyeglasses, our hats, our watches, our phones, will be integrated in a way that we have the information that we want and we need much more readily. If you think about it, years ago, everybody was afraid of privacy, and now our kids are mad if their phones don't know that they're hungry and have a burger in their hand in 5 minutes. I'm exaggerating, but that's the way we're going. So that's what's next. I think along with that, there's going to be a tremendous need for the synthesis and interpretation of data, because there's so much of it, which is going to lead to a real need for humanity and sciences to get back together. The people that are, a few years back, Silicon Valley started trying to bring in liberal arts people who could interpret the feelings, et cetera. So I think of other people, I think there's going to be a real need for liberal arts majors to help interpret what's happening with technology. I don't think that we're going back to life as it was before COVID. I had this conversation with the CEO of a large commercial real estate company and the CEO of a large insurance company on the same day a few months ago. And the commercial real estate guy was saying, well, this is great because of COVID and social distancing, people are going to need much more office space. And later in the day, the CEO of the insurance company told me, yeah, we're never going back. We got like 10,000 employees.
they like working at home. We don't need the office space anymore. So I think the freedom to work where you want, when you want is next. I think the gig economy is already here. And I think companies that are able to, so we used to have, Mike, we used to have 85 employees under one roof. Now we have hundreds of employees, but we don't pay them every day. In other words, we have learned that we need to be able to bring in people for 15 minutes, an hour, 4 hours. That's it.
Fractional employment.
That's right. And when people go and get another, in quotes, full-time job, the first question I ask them is, hey, can we still work with you? And they work it into their contract. In other words, like, yeah, for sure, because I love working with this team, and I know that I can, work, for 15 minutes or an hour on something really challenging, get paid, and it's fun. Which leads me to one last final point. I learned the hard way that millennials work all the time. The whole 9-to-5 construct has been dead for years, and most companies haven't caught up with it. There are certain companies or industries where you have to work 9-to-5. But if you're pushing your employees to work from 9-to-5, you're losing out on such bandwidth. It's more about, can you get this done by Tuesday of next week? I don't care how, when, right. Just do a good job. If it's 3 a.m, 2 a.m, 10 in the morning, okay. If it's from Paris or Vancouver or from Chicago, cool. I think that's where we're going. So some of these more conservative industries are going to be catching up with that construct.
It's so funny you say that, because last week, my daughter, who's a senior in college, asked me what time people start work at our company. And I said, well, I actually don't know, because people start work at all different times, depending on what they're doing or whatever. And she says, well, why do they call it a 9-to-5 job then? It doesn't seem like anyone works 9-to-5.
That's so great. I think that's yeah. What is a cassette tape? That's where we're going.
Right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your wisdom and your experience. I got a ton out of this, and I like your thinking, and I like that fractional employment. People should take that as, that's a great idea. Fractional employment. Well, I'm calling it fractional employment. You might call it gig economy or 1099 or whatever you want to call it. But being able to find someone to solve a problem you have right now without having to, do the background check and put them on the payroll and pay them benefits and all that, and just pay them for the time like you would some other, vendor partner that you have, makes a ton of sense.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's been an honor to hang out with you. I really enjoyed it. And, anything I can do to help you, the answer is going to be yes.
Thank you. Where do you want people to connect with you, buy your book? What do you want them to do?
Well, if you're interested in a fast growth advisory board, if you think you're one of those people that could use a virtual forum of, a balanced engineered virtual forum that will help you respond to the future more readily, that's flourishforums, plural.com, www.flourishforums.com. Innovation consulting is maddockdouglas.com. And you can reach me by email at mike@maddockdouglas.com. The book's available on Amazon, and find books, the 3 bookstores left near you.
Right. Plan D, lesson from the world's most successful disruptors. And check out Mike's other books as well. Mike, thank you so much. Enjoy your day.
Brother, thank you. See you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.